Well, hello everyone. I'm your host, Jacob Friedman, and welcome to Cutting Through the Noise. My goal on this series is to bring on masters of their respective crafts to provide real, authentic insight. And today's guest is a storyteller who cuts through the noise. He has a technical background spanning offensive security, threat research, and security architecture, but he eventually pivoted over to the creative side, and now has been running a successful cybersecurity podcast and media company called Hacker Valley Media. So without further ado, I'm really excited to please welcome Ron Eddings.
Yes,
hey,
sir.
Hey, welcome on, Ron.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate it, man. You got a very busy schedule. You're very in demand. I see you putting out a bunch of content. So, it means a lot you just taking the time to appear on today's show.
It means a lot to be here. Thanks for including me.
Well, absolutely, man. To start it off, pretty easy question, but I wanted to ask, in your perspective, what does storytelling mean to you?
Storytelling is a can of worms that I think everybody has a different way of pulling out and describing what the definition is. But when you look at a story or the art of storytelling, it's really a problem, and the solution to the problem is the story itself. And that's, I think, the simplest way to put it.
At what point, I guess in your life, did you realize that storytelling was a skill worth learning?
It wasn't that long ago, honestly. Around the pandemic time, a lot of people were second careering, learning about a lot of things. And one of the things that I happened to pick up around that time was podcasting. With podcasting, there's a lot that goes into it. There is the technical aspect, but there's also the entertainment aspect. With a podcast, you have to be entertaining. You have to use your voice. My podcast is a little different, though. I have a video podcast, so I have to use my whole person. And when I started to do video podcasting, I hired a vocal coach. And the vocal coach let me know a lot of things that I could do to, better present myself to my audience and just be a better presenter in general. One thing that she mentioned was, Ron, you have this big forehead. You could use your eyes and your forehead to help tell your stories. And then I thought, well, hold on, I don't know how to tell stories. How do I get better at telling stories? So I bought a few books, and two books that I bought was a book on how Pixar tells stories, and then another book that I got was a book by Kendra Hall called Stories That Stick. And with these books, you could reach out to the authors. So I connected with both of the authors on LinkedIn. They both do storytelling training. So I started to work with both of them to become a better storyteller. And they gave me some really good insights on, presenting information to not just be little data points connected together by very little connective tissue, but to give very nutrient dense information. And how you do that is by providing scenic details. If I'm going to tell you a story, a good thing to do is set context. Where was I at during the time of this problem? I said stories are problems and the solution is the story itself. Saying it all happened on a Friday at 9 a.m. It was cold, dark, gloomy. It was raining outside. All of a sudden, you now have a little bit of a picture painted in your mind. And with that little bit of information, I knew that there was a lot more under the surface than what I was doing in the past.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I like that you pointed out the importance of finding essentially a mentor, someone who's skilled within an area that you're looking to improve within. I
Mhm.
think that's pretty translatable across really any skill set. One thing I was thinking of is when you mentioned Pixar, I started thinking of a lot of childhood movies and stuff, that I grew up on. Did you ever have a favorite story or series growing up that kind of impacted the way that you view stories?
One thing that stands out with my childhood that I think still gets me to this day, but in the live action format, is The Lion King. Such a
Mm,
cool movie that I feel like kids could relate to, because in a way, like kids are like Simba. They're growing up. They look at the world as their kingdom. In a way, they're invincible. And also seeing that in Broadway, I was I was put back into being a kid when I saw it on Broadway, and I think the one that stands out the most is definitely The Lion King.
it's a great movie. It's a story of betrayal, story of redemption. It's a story of growth. It's
Yep.
a classic. I know that I was forever scarred by, well, pun intended, the scar scene. Right.
Right.
That's awesome. So, I guess going into the your background, I was alluding to it, and during the introduction, that you do have a technical background. You had done a little bit of offensive security, threat intelligence, and research. You've done security architecture. What inspired the bridge over to being on the creative side?
There was a few very pivotal moments. The first pivotal moment was I got challenged by a few friends to create some YouTube videos. And this was
Mm,
back in 2017. I created 3 videos on how to write an exploit using Python. I went and showed how to look at something called a CVE, which is kind of like the way that we look at vulnerabilities. It has the description, it has the severity of a vulnerability, but it also lets you know which open source packages may be vulnerable, or which parts of an open source package may be vulnerable to exploitation. So I created a video breaking all of those elements down in a 3-part series. And at around the same time, I just so happened to meet my wife. My wife, we met at the coffee shop back in California when I lived there. And she was doing a 30-day Instagram live challenge. So I thought, oh, okay, I like this girl. She's doing something creative. Let me go ahead and try to like match her energy. So I went from doing that 3-part series to a 30-day challenge to myself, where I went live on YouTube for 30 days straight. This was back in 2017, before anybody knew how to use things like Restream. Restream wasn't even around back then. So I used OBS, hacked my way together to do it, and I got a lot of recognition from my peers in cybersecurity. They really enjoyed that live session that I did. And then my co-founder of Hacker Valley, Chris Cochran, he just so happened to see that live series that I did. And he reached out. He's like, "Hey, I saw what you're doing on YouTube. I just so happen to be moving to California in a few months. Can I stay with you at your hacker mansion that you're building? You mentioned that you're building a hacker mansion in your YouTube series, so I'm coming through. Can I stay there?" Me and Chris, we've been brothers. We met in Maryland way back in the day. So I said absolutely. And
yeah.
ever since then, we set out just to challenge ourselves, not only creatively but professionally, physically. And it's kind of just spiraled and spiraled more over time, and that's how we got here today.
I think that's a really important thing as well. Because shout out Chris, he's awesome, love him as well. But you equated storytelling to education, and that's a really important way of communicating information today. That I think that from a different lens, that I think a lot of sellers have room for improvement on, right?
Mhm.
And really being able to put your audience in the shoes and in the situation of where you're trying to describe to them. Was there ever a educational series or specific tutorial that you created that you think really stood out or was like an inflection point within your career outside of the one you just mentioned?
That was definitely a major turning point. Another major turning point was a project that Hacker Valley worked on last year called Technically Divided. Technically Divided is a series about the most divisive topics in technology and cybersecurity. Myself and Chris Cochran, we were working with an organization called Exonius, and they were like, "Hey, we're doing this yearly survey, and this yearly survey has questions that they go to a ton of industry leaders and ask them questions on, like, hey, what is the most vulnerable type of organization, or who's the most vulnerable employee at an organization?" They would go to hundreds of leaders and ask them the same questions over and over again. And to build this survey was very expensive. I think it was over $100,000. So we
Wow.
said, "Hey, hold on, we could do that same thing and ask a lot of leaders the same types of questions, but also have content to share along the way." And that is what we did with our series, Technically Divided. It ended up winning one of these awards back here that we got. It won an Anthem Award for Best Internet Series. So that was, I would say, another project that gave me even more confidence to continue down this creative endeavor.
It's really cool. And it's cool to think about. Um, so I know you mentioned the two different leaders that you reached out to. You saw their work, you were impressed by it, so you reached out to learn from the best. Um, for those out there that are looking to grow their storytelling ability, are there any specific frameworks, or is there anything else that outside of maybe if they don't have access to that specific leader, is there anything else that you'd recommend they kind of look into if they want to start their storytelling journey?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of resources out there. And I think the best resource is always within yourself. You have the stories within you, and you just have to practice telling them. One thing that I realized when I read the book Stories That Stick is when you tell a story once, the second time you tell that story, you have to come at it with the same intensity. If I'm telling you my background as a cybersecurity leader or professional, when I tell person A, it has to be with energy, excitement, and passion, and all the things that made up that career. And I can't get burnt out of telling that story ever because someone hasn't heard it. But for someone that wants to get better at just telling their story in general, there is one framework that I really love, and it's called the Story Circle. It's by Dan
Mm,
Harmon. He's the creator and writer of Rick and Morty. Uh, and he has a really awesome framework that's just broken down to, I think, 8 steps. And it's really good for figuring out which elements of this story circle that you want to include in any story. Not every story warrants a framework. So I think that's where a lot of people kind of like overcomplicate storytelling. They make it seem like it's a scientific endeavor, but it's an endeavor that is just more about trying something new out, seeing what sticks, and iterating on it as you go.
I think those are all good points. So the main topic of this show is really cutting through the noise. There's a lot of messaging out there. I know we've chatted about it, from the marketing materials. Everyone's out there from the vendor perspective claiming that their tech is the best. You have sellers blowing up everyone, in email and calling their mobile phones and sending them LinkedIn messages. How and what messages and what methods would you advise people in this marketplace to utilize their storytelling ability? Is it only in a podcast format, or where else do you think that they could start to build up the skill set and exhibit it?
Yeah, I think the shorter of a story that you practice, the better. Because a lot of
Mm,
people don't have time. I'm more distracted than ever, especially with this thing called Instagram and TikTok. I now it's showed me how distracted I truly can be because I'll scroll and I hear these 10, 30-second, 1 minute long stories that people have created that are very interesting and compelling. But if you're using something like LinkedIn, we all use LinkedIn here. It's a great professional tool for connecting with others. I think that if you could write a message in the paragraph and you tell the story as to why you're saying that message. For example, when I reached out to those storytelling coaches, I gave them my story about I am here. I am this cybersecurity professional who wants to be better at telling stories to help motivate their team. I noticed that in my cybersecurity career that uh, a lot of the times that I would tell stories, it was just data points. It was like this happened, and now this happened, and I want this to stop happening. And that was not, it's not very inspiring, it's not very engaging or compelling. But you can make something very short and sweet compelling. One thing that I always like to do when I introduce myself is I say I'm a son of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has been with me my whole life. I got mentors at an early age, and because of cybersecurity, it supports my family today. And just that little bit of information is a story, and it's my story, but it doesn't take an hour to tell.
That's oh, just gonna see. I saw a question in the chat. Magdog Crash. She was asking, what are your best and worst storytelling that you told a CEO/board of directors? Great question, by the way.
The worst story that I've ever told was during interviews, for sure. During job interviews, I'm not on my A game. If I'm being peppered with questions and there's something very important on the line, I would say previously, I definitely used to have like a little bit of performance anxiety when it comes to something that feels like a pop quiz. And I remember when I was early on in my career, I interviewed at Google, Facebook, and even at Netflix. And I bombed all of those interviews. They
Okay.
asked me about my background. I wasn't prepared to share it. I didn't practice it. I didn't rehearse it. So I just said, hey, I've been in cybersecurity for 5 years. I'm a network analyst. I want to take this job. And that lets them know very little about who Ron Eddings is. So I would say that was one of my worst stories. Best story is definitely, my son of cybersecurity story. That's one of my favorites to tell because it's so personal to me. I am a son of cybersecurity. I just had a little baby girl, and I look at my daughter as a granddaughter of cybersecurity. So I would say that's my best story just because I like it so much.
I love that, and congratulations, by the way. That's super exciting.
Thank you.
I liked your point regarding your worst storytelling story. Just because for me, I have that same kind of performance anxiety and find myself freezing. So keeping it some short bullet points is always super helpful. Have gives me a quick ladder rung to grab. If you find yourself drowning. So I think that's really
Yeah.
important, especially to shout out for people that are listening as they're beginning their journeys. Um, there's a lot of questions kind of coming in right now. So one from Alana, if we can bring that one up, is she's asking to provide a short example of a bad story and then how you could potentially transform it into a good story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned my personal story, but we could try something a little different. A lot of the times when you go to a job interview, for example, you're asked, "Give me a story about the skill that you're greatest at," or "Give me the thing that you need to work on most." So I'll ask you, and let's see if we could take your story from point A to a 100.
I like that. And
Well,
wow,
that
these are
that was a question for you. What would you say is your best or worst skill if this was a job interview?
that's really hard. I mean, I would say best skill would be, I'm just use a cop out for Clifton's strengths, right? Because I like kind of having someone else analyze me, but I would say individualization. I have a knack at being able to meet with people and really understand what they're saying and getting to the root of the why, right? As
Mhm.
far as for worst area, I would say maybe analysis paralysis when I'm trying to research and prepare for things. Sometimes I just freeze because there's too many options, and sometimes I just need someone to point me in the right area and then I can execute it. But if I'm starting at the high level strategy all by myself, then there's too many variables to consider, and I just do find myself slowing down a bit.
Yeah,
But
so to put that in the form of a story, you would bring up some specific examples. I think that's always number
yeah.
one for storytelling is like you give the answer, but you also give specific examples. So if you are great at getting to the root of something, you could say, I have workflows that I've built over the course of my career. One workflow that I've built is my production workflow. My production workflow is a set of many different steps. And there was this one time where we had a episode that just couldn't get edited because the audio was having a corruption issue. So we thought there was the video that was unequal length of the audio. So what I did was I had a meeting with the entire team, and
Mm.
I went through each and every person and asked them individually, what's blocking this project from getting done. From that series of asking people what happened, I finally figured out that there was actually no problem. The problem was that the person downloaded the wrong file that we ultimately said in the past, don't use this file, but they just didn't see that message. But by holding the meeting, holding everyone accountable, I was able to get to the root of it. So I would say getting to the root of those getting to the root of challenges is my biggest strength. I would use something like that. I would say that's kind of like a framework. Number one is giving those specific examples.
That's awesome. And it reminds me of, I'm a bit out of practice because I haven't interviewed in a while, but the STAR method, the situation, task, action, result. That's how I used to
Mm.
always prepare for myself when I was interviewing for new jobs throughout college and whatnot, meeting with recruiters, just so you could get right to the point and convey your impact within a specific situation. So that's definitely something that I'm going to take back as some homework and continue to work on. So
We all got to work on that. That's a hard one to work on, but interviewing is, I think, the best place to practice your storytelling skills because it's a hostile environment. People are looking to you for that information, and the better that you're able to give it in that type of environment, I think the better that you could perform in any environment when it comes to storytelling.
totally agree. So we have another great question in the chat from Tim Shockey. So shout out Tim. Which IT discipline is most lacking in beneficial storytelling skills?
Yes. Which element in IT?
Or IT discipline? That's the wrong question. By the way, on the screen, it was a little bit farther down. Which IT discipline is most lacking in beneficial storytelling skills? There we go.
Yeah, I think that the individual contributor is the one, or the group of people that could probably benefit the most from storytelling. When you look at things like IT or cybersecurity, the executives, they're kind of expected to speak the language of the business a bit more and to tell the who, what, when, where, why, and how of a incident or a request or an opportunity. But when you think about the engineers out there, the analysts, they are the ones driving the engine. The better that they are at telling the stories, the more likely it is that they're going to get budget. They're going to get the right tools that they need. They're going to get the right accesses that they need to get their job done. And when you have your engineers or your analysts, your individual contributors working in harmony, that you're just going to see a net positive, not only for your team but for the entire organization. I can't tell you how many times I've heard cybersecurity practitioners tell me that they can't get budget. I think that at least part of the solution to getting more budget is telling a good story as to why you need that money and all of the side effects and consequences and opportunities that are out there that are going to exist if this budget is not acquired.
That's a great point on the asking for budget and a lot of the pushback that some of these leaders receive, because one thing that we often see is that they aren't speaking the language of the business, right? They're speaking about things from completely their point of view, and maybe they're speaking to non-technical leaders and they're using too many acronyms or etc. And so I think that, to your point, storytelling is really one of the best ways to bridge a knowledge gap and get everyone on the same page. So we have another good question. Tim Shockey says, so when the best story is heavily data informed, but your audience has low data acumen, how can you best influence?
That's a great question. You have to find an anchor point. One thing that I always recommend when going into a situation like this is understanding who your audience is. The worst thing that you could do is join a meeting and not see who's on that meeting. And not we don't always have that opportunity. Maybe it's a in-person meeting, so we don't necessarily know who all is going to join into that room. The best thing that you could do is ask the organizer, hey, who is going to be on this meeting? I need to know. You do the research on those people or on those groups to see which challenges and opportunities are most relevant to them. And then you start to build a story out with components that they're going to understand. I could tell you that I love to code. I love to code in Python. And for a long time, I thought that if someone just knew what I knew about Python, they would love it just as much as me. But I now know that that's not the case. Some people don't enjoy coding at all. But talking about all of the benefit that I could provide with the output of my code is a lot better of a solution than telling them how it's designed. I just heard a great quote from this gentleman named Robert Pace. He's a cybersecurity CISO. He said that when he speaks to his team, he says, if I'm asking for the time, don't tell me how to build a watch. I thought that was very powerful. I think that's what I would also keep in the back of my mind if I'm sharing a lot of data points to non-data oriented people.
I found this on the web.
Oh, got Siri chiming in here. Such a good conversation that even the robots want to participate. I really liked your point about knowing your audience. And, I think that's an important thing that people should do, whether it's, getting to know your boss, what's important to them, knowing how you're scored, knowing how to convey the value of what you're doing in the workplace, as well as if you're trying to reach out and create a new relationship, understanding what's important to those specific people. What are some of the key areas you look for? Like, I know that I sometimes make different kinds of frameworks for writing down details about people, whether it's looking on their LinkedIn profile or just trying to find information about them online. What are some key details that you look for when you're kind of trying to get to know someone before meeting them?
I like to look at what makes someone a hero.
Mm,
We all have it in our own right. Going back to The Lion King being one of my favorite, most standout movies as a kid. I do believe that when we watch that movie, Lion King, we all look at ourselves as Simba. The next coming, or maybe we look at our kids as Simba, but we all relate to Simba as a focal point. And I think that if you were to look at someone's profile, you're doing research on them. I'm looking for the things that they're proud of. I wanna really anchor to those things, and I want to also try to find the things that they don't necessarily like. If you're hosting a dinner party for someone, you want to make sure that you have a call out to see, are you allergic to anything? Is there any food? Are there any foods that you don't like? Same for information. I think that communication is always the best way to do this. If you are leading a team, it's very important to tell your team how you like to be presented with information and stories.
mm,
If you don't mention that, it could feel like friction. It could feel like someone is constantly getting in your way because they're giving you information in a way that does not serve you, your workflow, your processes, or maybe even your happiness. Uh, One thing that I've seen over time, this is a funny story, is my wife. She loves to tell stories, but she loves to tell one story, but with five other stories beforehand. And when we first met, I didn't know this about her, but she would start telling me about her day, and then I'd ask her about how was work, and then all of a sudden, I'm hearing backstory from when she was a teenager. I'm like, whoa, hang on a second. Like, I thought we were just talking about your work day. But
yeah.
some people tend to have their own format for telling stories. Hers is a journey. Mine is a little bit more direct, but getting to know that about each other, we've kind of met in the middle. She's like, I'm going to take you on a journey. It's just not going to be a 4 hour story. And she likes the same from me. She's like, hey, I don't want to just hear my day consisted of meeting with this person and that person. I want to know what y'all spoke about. How did it make you feel?
Mm,
What happened? What are you going to do next? She loves to tease me on, speaking of some of my best guy friends. Guys are known for not going too deep into their feelings. So if I hear about a marriage or a breakup, the first question my wife always asks is, how'd they meet? And I'm like, I didn't even think to ask that. But
yeah.
that's just the way in which she likes to hear stories. I would say it goes the same for the professional environment as well. We all have our preferences on telling and receiving them.
I think that's such an important point on how people, catering what you do to how your audience likes to receive information. Like for me, when I'm learning, there's a big, everyone kind of jokes on PowerPoint. They're like, sorry, I'm putting you into a death by PowerPoint type situation. But for me, I love visual aids, and they really help me stay on track, especially when I'm trying to learn about something complex. And so it's always interesting to hear, and not only that, but medium of communication. Some people are like, oh, please email me. That's the way I want to receive, information and outreach. And then other people are like, oh, if you email me, it's just going to go into a black hole. And then you can get the same kind of polarization on the other end for like mobile phones. Some leaders are saying, hey man, just text me. Some other people are like, hey, I'm going to shoot you out of a cannon if you dare. So, I think that that's such an important point. Comes back to knowing your audience, understanding how they receive information. And I mean, I guess on a separate topic, knowing how guys are a little more concise and direct to the point, stereotypically, I think that's just a really good point. But I think that's room for improvement for all of us, understanding the why, how people met, being more honest with how we felt in the moment. And I think that's something that I personally will kind of take out of this conversation.
For sure.
It's awesome. So we talked about the story circle. Another framework that I thought was interesting that a lot of up and coming young bustling professionals admire is the rags to riches story. I guess, have you ever seen yourself utilizing the rags to riches story in any kind of storytelling situation, or is it one that you more just kind of appreciate that you've seen within the media?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it would only be right if I shared story circle first, kind of like the elements that make it
Yeah.
up, and then jump into rags to riches. So the story circle, step one is called you. And this is where you establish the protagonist. You give a little bit of context as to who is this story about. One element that I didn't mention about storytelling and stories in general is there is always a problem, and it's typically the character, it's the protagonist. The protagonist is the problem and the solution to a story. So you got to establish a protagonist first. The second phase is need. And this is when you find out that something just isn't quite right. I need this. I need to get more time back in my day. I need to build this company because no one sees this big opportunity. The third phase is go. So this is crossing the threshold. Once you find that big opportunity, you need to take that first initial step. In a lot of cases, you watch a lot of movies, this is someone, identifying the problem and then waking up in the middle of the night saying, tomorrow is the day I'm going to start. That's go. And then number 4 is search. And this is when you kind of cross the chasm. Like you could think of it like a little bit after the explosion, but the explosion's still happening. And this is when you are being tested and trying to get your needs met. Number 5 is find. And with find, this is when you meet the goddess, when you have that first initial big opportunity. This could be getting that job interview, or when you tell someone a story about when you had that first ounce of success. When I got my college degree, that's when the real work started, right? Number 6 is take, and this is paying the price. This step is my favorite. I feel like I really identify with this step because I'm always paying the piper. I'm always making the progress, but there's always a price that must be paid. If you want to get a banging body in the gym, you got to pay the price. You got to go to the gym, and that could be a little bit frustrating and painful. And that's kind of like, part of the hero's journey as well. Number 7 is the return. When you look at any great story, any part of our life, you look at the future, you look at history, the future is always kind of based upon the past. And with return, this is kind of like the protagonist returning back to their original selves. Because if I go to the gym and get an awesome body, then I'm still the same person underneath of it all. And there, at some point, I'm going to realize that I'm still me. So that's kind of the part of this story circle. And then the last part of the story circle is change. And this is when you bring together all of the elements and you incorporate them. So I went to the gym for 1 year. I realized that, hey, I'm still the same person. I could have had this confidence a long time ago before this body. So what I'm going to do now is just exude the level of confidence that was always deep within me. And that's kind of the framework for the story circle. You ready for Rags to Riches?
Yeah, I just also want to make a point on that. I really like the fitness example because, maybe just because you, according to your own preferences, improved your appearance, and that's, is led to increased confidence. But, I really think that there is something to be said about confidence coming from discipline. After you've consistently applied yourself, hammered at the mountain thousands and thousands of times, and the competency that results from that and how the confidence comes from that. I think that's a really important fact that at the end of the day there's no substitute for hard work and continuously to flourish and improve yourself, and focusing on being disciplined with your time is a way to progress. It's just something that I'm super passionate about, and when you're relating it to the gym specifically, I love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's dive into Rags to Riches, man.
Yeah, so Rags to Riches is one of the easiest formats to tell. And I think that deep down inside, we all have the Rags to Riches persona within us. With the Rags to Riches framework, it's I didn't have opportunity in the past, and then you're kind of fighting to get opportunity to ultimately be the champion of something. In my life, when I was young and hungry, and I still am hungry, always got to eat. But when I was young and really focused on my cybersecurity technical career, I wanted to be the best hacker. And I felt as though no one ever saw me. No one ever saw me as a hacker. I was young and athletic. People wanted me to be an athlete, but I said, no, I want to be a hacker. I felt like I wasn't getting my flowers. So I had to go and put the work in, blood, sweat, tears, a little bit of sweat equity, a little bit of paying the piper along the way, banging my head against the keyboard, cutting my nails up, typing so hard, going hard. And then one day, guess what? I got my big opportunity. I became a hacker. I worked for the NSA, and got to break into systems and do things that the best hacker really would do. And underneath of it all, I realized that I always was that person. And no one was not giving me my flowers, but that was just the story that I was telling myself, maybe a little bit of the story that the public saw. And that's kind of like the Rags to Riches storyline. And with most cybersecurity companies, they have that story. Even a lot of IT companies have that story because they saw that something was fundamentally broken and they had to put the work in to fix it. And a lot of times when you put the work in to fix it, guess what happens? You get a little bit of money at the end, or a lot of companies have been going IPO, getting bought up. So I think, when you look at something like a technology companies, they often have a Rags to Riches story embedded within them.
I love that. Everyone loves to root for the underdog, the David versus Goliath moment, someone that can really, exceed all expectations. And I love that you kind of brought that personal story back, and the sweat equity that you put in to get the outcome that you were looking for.
Yeah.
Another good comment by Mad Dog Crash is it overkill to produce a CGI animation movie to tell a story when it comes to InfoSec?
Get out of my head, Mad Dog. I've been thinking about this. I think that the cybersecurity world needs it, especially because a lot of the times we don't have a protagonist in the story. It's all about the product. A protagonist is an animate object. It's alive. I spoke a lot about Lion King. Simba is a living creature, and Simba is solving the problem. Simba is the solution to the stories, the solution to the problem. And I think a product can be, but we don't necessarily look at products as animate objects. So I think we definitely need a little bit of the CGI component, but maybe even something that's easier is just putting a person in the middle of it all. One thing that Apple does really well when they do their more cinematic commercials, and also when they do the releases of their phones, is all around a person. You have Tim Cook standing up on stage. He's the only person. You're not just looking at the phone and hearing narration. You're seeing Tim Cook speak. And they have like this really awesome holiday commercial that they put out. And it was all about this young kid who uh, seemingly wasn't spending time with his family. He was always on his phone. And during the holidays, he was always on his phone, just texting, doing something. And then at the very end, he pulled out this video that he was working on the entire holiday break and made his family cry and realized that they thought he wasn't being present, but he really was with his phone. So Apple got it two ways. They said, hey, this is a powerful device that you could use to tell stories. And by the way, it looks like this kid's distracted. He's really not.
I love that. I mean, I guess the superhero points are still sticking in my head. As far as like rallying a brand around a central figure, I think that's a really good point. Certain people in the media do that. I mean, there's inherent risk with that, with attaching it to a specific real life person, of course. But I just remember I was like, what was zipping around my head was, when we go to these big technology conferences, a lot of vendors spend a lot of money on booths, and there's a whole bunch of effort and strategy put into where to position them, how to decorate it, how to brand it. And one that always I find interesting, and probably has no lack of funding, is CrowdStrike, because they have those massive, almost like Warhammer-esque figures. And I was just thinking, like, it would be interesting to see some of these security companies, whether it's EDR or various other tech, do like a kind of superhero. Like, this is how we're fighting the bad guys, and kind of creating a figure to rally behind. It's a really cool concept that stands out to me.
Yeah, CrowdStrike is also one of our biggest partners. We are the producers for the CrowdStrike Adversary Universe podcast, and
Wow.
they always, really focus on telling stories. They have two hosts on that podcast, and what they do is they talk about the adversary. And one of the central components of their podcast is the adversary are people. They're not just this machine or this evil germ that's out there. They are animate objects, animate beings, and they have families, they have goals, motivations. And the better that we do at understanding these motivations behind the adversary, what drives them as people, the better we are against defending them. And I'm like, oh, that's a great way to look at defending against adversaries, is what motivates the person, not necessarily what technology are they going to use to break into my environment.
Yeah, I mean, what motivates them, and maybe not what tool they're going to use, but what resources do they have access to? What of yours is already out there? What can they leverage? I know there's this whole ransomware as a service model where someone will get just barely their foot in the door and maybe just then sell that piece of access, right? And just there's varying levels that you can buy access within a company to get within there. So, another funny question I was kind of laughing at in my head was from Justin Brady. He was asking, how do I become part of the fitness/hacker/superhero tribe? Sounds kind of badass.
Hey, you're already part of it, Justin. You know what to do.
Love that. Well, we're getting close to the end. There is one question that I was going to ask. I know that there's always buzzwords floating around, and one of them that has been hot and I know is going to continue to expand this year is generative AI. And as you apply generative AI, it can be used in a multitude of ways, but one of them is storytelling. You can ask it to tell you a story about X. You can give all types of different prompts. Do you think that Gen AI potentially poses a risk to the traditional storytelling authors, or do you think it'll become a benefit and a further tool to help expedite some manual processes?
Yeah, I look at AI as automation. And we all need automation. I could only imagine if I had to go outside, it's a little cold out right now, and hand crank my car, and then use a lot of manual effort on my car, or even do drive-in manual. Not necessarily my thing. I enjoy doing that like on occasion, but not all the time. And I think it's the same for storytelling. Uh, if I'm driving a manual car, there are people that are very excited about manual transmission will say that they could go faster than an automatic. transmission card. And there might be truth to that. I think that there might be. I don't know. I'm not scientific in that element, but I think it's the same for storytelling. You could use automation to help tell your stories, and you should, especially when time is not on your side. But if you don't have time on your side and you don't want to take as scenic of a route, definitely use AI. AI is not coming for your job. Someone using AI is coming for your job.
Wow, that's a tagline. AI is not coming for your job. Someone using AI is coming for your job. I think that's a whole post within itself.
Oh yeah.
We can expand upon. Well, last question from the audience before we start to wrap this up is from another one from Tim Shockey. He said, "What's the role of face-to-face relationships as foundations for effective storytelling versus standalone storytelling?"
What's the role of face-to-face relationships? Face-to-face relationships are primal to us when it comes to telling stories. I was born in the 90s, but what I've heard is way back in the day, our ancestors used to sit around the fire and tell stories. And I could tell you that when I was young, it wasn't by the campfire, it was by a flashlight. Me and my sisters would, be silly, tell each other stories. My mom was a very animated storyteller, especially about people that she worked with at the grocery store and some of her customers, always so passionate about it. And I think, when it comes to face to face, it's very effective. And even when you're not face to face and you're doing something like sending a LinkedIn message, that is still, it's still a powerful medium. And like you were mentioning earlier, Jacob, it just depends on how you like to hear stories. Some people don't love face-to-face interactions. Some people are very introverted and they don't necessarily want to do that face-to-face exchange, and they might be more comfortable with exchanging information and stories online. So I look at both as very effective. Both have a time and place. I don't love texting. I love phone calls. I don't love FaceTiming though. So I think that, some people will say face-to-face beats everything, but I would say it depends on what you're trying to tell a story on. But everything is a tool in your tool belt, and you should be using it all.
Those are all good points. And I think that also just depends on what the objective of the conversation is. Obviously, given your bandwidth as a human, because if you're trying to talk to someone across the country, some context may warrant that flight across the country. Some context maybe it makes more sense to do it on Zoom, right? So I think those are all great points. Any last comments, Ron, as we're wrapping this up, and anything, if anyone wants to learn more about you, Hacker Valley Media, etc., how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I would love for everyone to check out Hacker Valley. You could check us out by going to hackervalley.com. We are on every social media platform, every streaming platform. Would love for you all to check us out, give us a like, listen, and follow. But also, we have a creative mastermind that we host monthly. Our next session is January 31st. It's going to be all around topics like this, like storytelling. You can find that by going to hackervalley.com/mastermind.
Killed it. Well, awesome. Take us away, Simon.